He dragged his maid across the ballroom in front of hundreds, but he never imagined one word from her would destroy everything. Watch till the end. And if you believe truth always wins, hit like, share, and subscribe to Gateway Stories. The Whitmore mansion glittered like a diamond against the night sky, its windows glowing gold across the rolling hills of Beverly Hills. The sound of violins floated from the grand ballroom, mingling with laughter, champagne bubbles, and the faint clink of crystal glasses. It was the Whitmores' annual charity gala, an event that gathered America's richest and most powerful under one roof. Every detail had been perfected. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Silver trays carried hors d'oeuvres that cost more than a week's rent for most people. Journalists lingered near the entryway, hoping to capture a glimpse of Charles Whitmore, the man whose empire stretched from luxury hotels to tech conglomerates. His story was legend. The poor kid from Detroit who became one of the country's youngest billionaires. To the cameras, he was charming, generous, and every headline's dream, America's favorite philanthropist. But beneath the glow and glamour, there was something colder, quieter, something that lived in the spaces between the applause. Evelyn Carter moved among the guests like a shadow, her black uniform pressed, her hair tied neatly back. She carried a silver tray of champagne flutes, careful to keep her expression neutral. She had worked for the Whitmores for 3 years, 12-hour days, 6 days a week, never late, never rude. Her hands were often red and raw from cleaning chemicals, but she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Every paycheck went to her younger siblings, Marcus, studying engineering at a state college, and Lily, whose asthma medication often cost more than Evelyn's rent. She told herself every night that it was worth it. That one day Marcus would graduate, Lily would be healthy, and she could finally rest. But tonight, her hands shook. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the music that never stopped. Or maybe it was the way Margaret Whitmore, the lady of the house, had been watching her all evening. "Evelyn!" Margaret's sharp voice sliced through the hum of conversation. She stood beside the buffet table in an emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her diamond necklace caught the light with every movement. Each flash another reminder of distance between them, between worlds. "Yes, ma'am?" Evelyn turned, lowering her tray slightly. Margaret's manicured finger pointed at a bowl of soup. "Taste that." Evelyn hesitated. "Ma'am?" "Taste it. You think I serve my guests something this salty?" Her tone was mocking, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A few turned, whispering behind their glasses. Evelyn's face flushed. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll bring another." Margaret scoffed. "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence. You've been here 3 years and still can't follow a recipe. How much do we pay you for this?" A few guests laughed softly. Others looked away. Evelyn kept her head down, fighting back the sting behind her eyes. "It won't happen again, Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret smirked, satisfied with her small act of cruelty, and turned to rejoin her friends. Evelyn stood still for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The laughter around her faded into background noise. Wasn't the first time Margaret had humiliated her, but tonight, something in the woman's tone made it feel worse, heavier. Across the room, Charles Whitmore was watching. His blue eyes, sharp as glass, followed the exchange from across the ballroom. He wasn't angry about his wife's behavior. He was angry that it had happened at all. To him, the staff were tools, useful only if they stayed invisible. Evelyn's presence, her mistakes, her humiliation, everything reflected back on him. He downed his scotch in one swallow. Mr. Whitmore, A senator greeted him with a handshake, but Charles barely nodded. His mind was elsewhere. His empire, his name, his image, it all relied on perfection. And lately, perfection had been slipping. When the orchestra started its next song, he scanned the room again. His jaw tightened when he saw Evelyn standing near the buffet table, cleaning up the spilled soup. Her movements were quiet, efficient, and full of something he didn't like: restraint. In the world Charles Whitmore ruled, restraint was defiance. "Evelyn," a voice whispered beside her. She turned to see Ryan, Charles, and Margaret's 17-year-old son standing awkwardly near the table. He was dressed in a tailored suit, but his expression was softer than his father's, his tone uncertain. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Evelyn forced a small smile. "I'm fine, sir, thank you." Ryan frowned. "You shouldn't let her talk to you like that." "That's not my choice," she replied, keeping her eyes on the tablecloth. He hesitated, then whispered, "My dad. He doesn't like when things look bad in front of guests. Just be careful." Evelyn looked up for a brief moment, meeting his eyes. There was kindness there. Guilt, maybe, but she knew better than to respond. "I'll be careful," she said softly. Ryan nodded and slipped back into the crowd. For a moment, Evelyn stood still, her hands gripping the tray tightly. The laughter, the music, the light, it all felt distant, unreal. She had served these people for years, memorized their favorite drinks, their allergies, their gossip. She had been invisible long enough to see what they hid behind their smiles. Charles Whitmore's smile, especially. Behind that charm was a man who slammed doors, barked orders, and treated kindness like weakness. She had seen bruises on another maid once, seen how quickly the woman resigned the next morning. The orchestra swelled, and Evelyn returned to work, moving from guest to guest. But every time she passed Charles, she could feel his eyes on her, watching, measuring, waiting. At the far end of the ballroom, Margaret was laughing with friends again, her earlier fury replaced by champagne warmth. The guests clapped politely as Charles took the microphone for a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, smooth, confident. "Tonight isn't just a celebration of wealth, it's a celebration of giving back. Together, we've raised over $4 million for education initiatives across the country." Applause erupted, cameras flashed. Charles smiled, every movement rehearsed, every gesture calculated. Evelyn watched from the corner, her hands folded in front of her. For everyone else, he looked like a hero. For her, he was a man made of shadows. When the applause died down, Charles scanned the crowd once more. His gaze paused on her, and for a brief second the mask slipped. His smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. In that fleeting moment, she understood something she had never dared to before. Charles Whitmore wasn't angry about a spilled soup or a clumsy maid. He was angry about control, about the possibility that someone beneath him might one day see the cracks in his perfect facade. And though she didn't know it yet, she already had. The night continued with laughter and music, but the air in the ballroom had changed. Somewhere deep inside, a spark had been lit, a spark that would soon burn through everything Charles Whitmore had built. Evelyn didn't know when it would happen or how, but as she stood there, silent and still, her reflection shimmering faintly in the marble floor, she felt the weight of something coming. Something inevitable. The mansion slept the way the ocean sleeps, still on the surface, treacherous underneath. Hours past midnight, the driveway had emptied of limousines, the orchestra had packed away its polished bows, and the last echoes of champagne laughter had dissolved into the high ceilings. Only the staff moved now, soft as breath. A cart rolling, a door easing shut, a whisper traded at the far end of a corridor before vanishing into hush. Evelyn Carter's shoes made no sound on the runner down the west wing. She had been asked to do something unusual. Straighten the study, the head housekeeper had said, sliding a brass key into Evelyn's palm like a hot coin. Mrs. Whitmore wants it spotless for a morning meeting. It was phrased as a routine task, the way rich people styled orders as favors. But everyone knew Charles Whitmore's private study was not a room, it was a boundary. Staff entered with permission only, left no trace, and never lingered. Evelyn paused outside the door, the key warm from her skin. Beyond the carved mahogany, the house's heart ticked. Climate systems, security blink, the nearly imperceptible thrum of a refrigerated wine wall down the hall. She took a breath that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books and turned the key. The study opened like a vault. Dark paneled walls rose to a coffered ceiling. A fire glowed low in the marble hearth, down to amber coals. Bookshelves marched floor to ceiling, each row scrubbed of dust and arranged with a collector's precision. First editions, biographies of presidents, a signed memoir or two, all of it curated to say power without ever stating it. On the far wall, a leather Chesterfield faced a portrait of Charles. Navy suit, American flag lapel pin, jaw set at the angle of a campaign poster. Between them, his desk waited, an expanse of black walnut broad enough to land a drone on. 2 pens lay parallel on a blotter. A crystal decanter held 3 fingers of a single malt that cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent. She shut the door behind her and felt the sound of it in her ribs. For a long moment, she stood still, letting the quiet settle. The room had a scent beyond leather and smoke, something metallic and faint, like a coin held in the mouth. She set down her caddy. Microfiber cloths, a small brush, wood polish, the housekeeper's pride in a tote. Her training ran like muscle memory, top to bottom, left to right, clockwise. No fingerprints, no streaks. Touch the space without leaving any part of yourself inside it. She started with the shelves. The feather brush whispered along the spines, the art of the deal, ironic. The Federalist Papers, a coffee table book of his own properties. Towering exteriors against cobalt skies, lobby flower arrangements the size of small trees. The fire hissed. Somewhere in the ductwork a damper clicked. When she reached the credenza, a silver picture frame stopped her. The photo inside, Charles shaking hands with a former president on a hospital ribbon-cutting day, both men smiling as if the future had arrived early. She wiped the glass and set it back. The decanter came next, and then the desk, where she polished in slow ovals that revealed the wood's dark grain, the faint map of a life that never left coffee rings. The top right drawer was locked. They all were. Always were. Evelyn didn't jiggle them. She never had. You didn't test fences in houses like this. You learned where they were, and you walked the long way around. Still, the room felt watchful. Not alive exactly, but alert, as if waiting for a cue. She worked the baseboards, rubbed a scuff from the chair rail, straightened a stack of annual reports on the side console. When she came back to the desk, she noticed it. The lower drawer on the left sat not flush, but shy of it. So close to close that only someone who had just polished the front would notice the narrow seam of shadow. Evelyn stared at that seam the way a traveler stares at a shortcut she's been warned against. It was nothing, probably a file folder caught, a hinge sticky in the dry heat. She slid her cloth along the face. The wood was cool, the brass pull warmer. She pressed the corner with 2 fingers. The drawer didn't move. "Leave it," a voice said, the one that had protected her for 3 long years. Wipe the front, make it look right, and leave it. Her hand moved anyway. She curled 3 fingers around the pull and tried again. It resisted a heartbeat, then gave half an inch with the softest sigh, like a secret changing position in sleep. Inside lay order pretending to be chaos. A leather folio, a stack of manila envelopes without labels, a small tin of paper clips that had slid against the side. Nothing explosive, nothing cinematic. Still, her breath shortened. She eased the drawer another inch, careful not to mark the wood, and reached for the folio. The zipper's teeth ticked under her thumb. She stopped, the way you stop before stepping into traffic, and listen for what you can't see. The house hummed, the fire cooed. No footsteps, no voices. She unzipped the folio and opened it to a light sweet as an interrogation. Documents, insurance forms, a photocopy of a vehicle registration, VIN neatly typed, the company name on the second line, Whitmore Holdings Fleet Services. Her skin prickled. She flipped a page. Another form, this one stamped in gray. Confidential settlement agreement. A date from years ago. A number typed in clean black digits that didn't look like a number so much as an eraser. $2 million. Evelyn didn't breathe for a count of 3. The room seemed to lean closer. The next page wasn't a form. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed to the color of old straw, edges singed so that the corners wore tiny brown crescents. Someone had tried to burn it and stopped. She slid it free carefully and set it on the desk blotter, smoothing it with 2 fingers the way she would soothe a child's wrinkled homework. The headline punched through its years. Hit and run kills local college athlete. Driver flees. The date below it, over a decade past. A black and white photo. A young man in a track jacket, grin wide as the line he'd just crossed. Jamal Turner, 20, the caption read. Promising sprinter at Westbridge College, died at the scene late Saturday after being struck by a luxury sedan on Canyon Vista Road. Police are asking for witnesses to come forward. Her mouth dried. Canyon Vista. She knew that road. Every driver in Beverly Hills did. It curved along the ridge where houses cost the price of 5 hospitals. A place where time slowed, where engines purred, where a man in a tux could take a corner too fast and count on silence to settle after. Evelyn's fingers hovered above the name as if touch could conjure the boy back from newsprint. Jamal Turner. 20. Her brother Marcus was 20. Her mind saw Marcus's smile and, uninvited, overlaid it on the grainy image. She swallowed, a motion that scraped. She read the first paragraph again, then the second, which was shorter and worse. Authorities believe the vehicle involved may be a high-performance sedan with front-end damage. The word sedan pulled at another memory, the garage, the third bay by the tool wall, dark for months. A covered car, low and long, whose battery tender had blinked like a heartbeat under the tarp. She dusted around it once and felt the sense of trespass that comes from being near something dormant and dangerous. She hadn't asked why a man who displayed everything he owned kept that one thing under wraps. She turned back to the folio. Beneath the clipping, more papers with edges browned in tiny waves. Someone had held a match or lighter to the stack, then smothered the flame with a palm. The settlement sheet lay among them like a white flag. There were signatures. There were initials. One set belonged to a woman whose last name matched the article's final sentence. Turner is survived by his mother, Angela. The number wouldn't leave her. 2 million. In a different life, it was a miracle. In this one, it was price, tariff, hush. Evelyn tried to imagine being that mother, sitting in a small kitchen with a lawyer's voice explaining how nothing would bring her son back, how this would help. how this would be closure. She tried and failed. There was no money that could live beside a headline like that without poisoning the room. Fear rose in her, not movie fear, all sprint and scream, but the kind that stands very still and listens for the slightest change in the air. She scanned the room. The portrait, the fire, the tiny lens of a smoke detector in the corner. Was there a camera in here? There would be a camera. Men like Charles did not rely on locks alone. She slid the clipping into the folio, then paused, heart hammering. Leaving it where she found it was safe. Safer. But suddenly, safe felt like a synonym for silent, and silent felt like complicity. Her hands trembled as they hovered, unsure of which future they were about to choose. The door latch made a sound, metal kissing metal somewhere in the house, and she shot upright, pulse detonating in her ears. She held still, hearing everything at once. Air through a vent, wood settling, the far-off elevator's sigh. No footsteps approached. She let the air go from her lungs in a thin thread, and only then noticed how hard she'd been gripping the paper. Focus. She reassembled the folio exactly as she'd found it, edges squared, zipper closed, and returned it to its place. The manila envelopes went in the same order, the paper-clip tin angled as memory insisted. She closed the drawer until it sat almost flush, then eased it the final eighth of an inch with gentle pressure from her palm, watching the seam of shadow vanish like a wound healing. The room looked identical to the way it had looked when she entered. That was the point of rooms like this. They were designed to be immune to anything but their owner's will. But the symmetry no longer comforted. The calm had a taste now, and it was bitter. Evelyn stepped to the window and lifted the edge of the curtain with 2 fingers. Outside, the city glowed in the valley as if spilled from a bowl, lonely little lanterns of other people's lives. She thought of Lily asleep on the pull-out in their rental, the inhaler by her pillow. She thought of Marcus, bent over a calculus textbook, the kitchen clock ticking like a metronome for their future. Everything she did here was for them. Every humiliation metabolized into rent and tuition. The calculation had always been simple. Endure, provide, survive. Tonight, it did not balance. Her mind replayed the gala, the soup, the laughter, Margaret's satisfaction, the way Charles's gaze had skated over her like a searchlight looking for a trespasser. She recognized the look now for what it was, recognition. Not of her, of risk. The instinct to run, out of the study, out of the house, out of the life, rose and ebbed. Run to whom? The police? With what? A story and a memory of a covered car, a clipping someone would ask how she obtained. She imagined a detective's face closing by degrees as she said the words housekeeper, study, drawer. She imagined being asked to hand over the only job that kept her siblings fed so a DA could decide months later not to pick a fight with a billionaire whose name dangled from the new hospital wing. She pressed her knuckles to the desk to steady herself. The wood was living cool, and for an instant she saw it as a stage. Donors applauding, cameras chewing, the ribbon cut with oversized scissors while the truth waited 2 doors down, tucked amid leather and glass. If there was going to be a reckoning, it needed teeth. Proof. Evidence that didn't evaporate the moment Charles flexed his Rolodex. Her eyes went to the folio again, then to the blotter where the clipping had rested, then to her own apron pocket, empty and available. The decision wasn't a leap so much as a click. Something aligned inside her, and she understood that she had already passed the turnoff where compliance exits. It wasn't courage, it was math. It was a woman's sense for which choices later trap you in smaller rooms. She slid the drawer open the tiniest bit, enough to feed in 2 fingers, and coax the Clippin free. She didn't take the settlement. That paper had names and signatures like tripwires. The Clippin had public ink and the gravity of a mother's grief. She folded it once more along its desert-dry crease and tucked it into the inner pocket of her apron, the one where she kept Band-Aids and safety pins to fix other people's emergencies. The paper lay against her ribs, light as a leaf, heavy as a verdict. A small sound in the hallway, heels, then the hush of them stopping, froze her again. She killed the fire with the iron poker's lever, dimmed the desk lamp to its prior notch, and rotated the decanter so the level sat exactly where it had been. At the door, she paused with her hand on the knob, counted to 5, and listened as the world argued softly with sleep. She eased the door open and slipped into the corridor. The house, indifferent to revelations, exhaled its manufactured air. At the end of the hall, a motion sensor woke a sconce with buttery light. It died behind her like a closing eye. She walked the long runner back to the service stair, past the framed photographs of gala nights, groundbreakings, champions of industry. In several, Charles's arm hooked around a beneficiary's shoulders the way a hawk's shadow hooks over a field. On the landing, she stopped and gripped the railing, not to rest but to choose. She could put the Clippin back and become again the version of Evelyn who navigated insult by reducing surface area, who made herself a narrow target and wore invisibility like armor. That Evelyn fed her family. That Evelyn slept. That Evelyn looked down when spoken to and lived. The paper warmed against her, gathering the heat of her. She set her jaw. In the pantry, she slipped her apron off and folded it with ordinary care. She tucked it beneath the stack of laundered linens where it would look like what it was, a uniform waiting for morning. She pulled a fresh apron from the shelf so no one would wonder, tied it tight, and finished wiping down the prep counter a junior server had abandoned mid-shift. Hands working, mind elsewhere, she returned the room to the immaculate, antiseptic calm the Whitmores required of every space they owned. Evelyn could feel the house's systems resettling after her passage, as if circulation had slowed again now that the minor infection of disobedience had passed. She slid the pantry door shut, checked the clock, and took the back corridor toward staff quarters. She didn't look right or left in case the portraits there began to move. At the threshold of her small room, she paused, palm on the jamb. She pictured a mother in some other part of the city who had gone to bed for a decade with absence beside her, who had learned the many names of silence, dignity, necessity, fate. Evelyn had not met Angela Turner, but she knew the architecture of that woman's mornings. The coffee poured in the same cup, the photo frame dusted, the breath held every time brakes squealed somewhere beyond the window. Evelyn stepped inside, closed the door, and set her forehead against the cool of it, as if she could leach out the heat gathering in her chest. Then she lifted the hem of the fresh apron and unpinned the inner pocket she'd moved from the other one, a small seamstress trick, a habit of making her tools go where she did. The clipping slid into the space with the soft rush of paper finding its own weight. She did not sleep so much as hold herself still until the sky began to pale. When she rose, the house returned to its daytime theater. Espresso hiss, laundry drum, the offstage murmurs that precede a show. The study would be opened in an hour. Charles would sit at his desk and examine the world for weakness, never imagining that a scrap of his past had walked out under his chandeliers in the pocket of a woman he did not bother to learn. Evelyn buttoned her blouse with careful fingers, tucked the apron string twice, and looked at herself in the mirror above the tiny sink. The face, looking back, wasn't new. It had old knowledge arranged into a new shape. When she stepped into the corridor, the house did not flinch. It never would. But somewhere a balance had tipped, so quietly even she almost missed it. And though she couldn't say how or when, she knew the tray she carried would not always be for other people's glasses. She headed for the breakfast room, where menus waited and flowers lay in a wet towel for arranging. On her way past the study, she did not glance at the door. The secret was no longer inside it. She knew, with the cold certainty that lives in the bones, that this secret no longer belonged to the dark. The morning of the gala broke clear and warm, sunlight spilling across the Whitmore estate like polished gold. Crews moved briskly, arranging the final touches for the event that would define the Whitmore legacy, a night for cameras, for donors, for perfection. Inside, servants moved with the rhythm of ritual. Silverware gleamed, flowers the color of cream and blood filled the ballroom with scent. Every corner of the mansion seemed rehearsed, as though the air itself had been trained to impress. Evelyn Carter stood in the service corridor, her uniform pressed, her expression steady. No one looking at her could have guessed what she carried against her heart. The clip-in was folded small, hidden deep in her apron pocket, the paper's edges softened by her trembling fingers. She hadn't slept much since she'd found it. The words "hit and run" still pulsed behind her eyelids each time she closed them. She'd almost put the clip-in back twice, once before dawn, and once again when she heard Charles's voice in the hall. Both times something stopped her. Not courage, something colder. A sense that the secret she'd uncovered was already awake and waiting to be spoken. Now, as the orchestra tuned in the next room, Evelyn checked her reflection in the silver tray she carried. She adjusted her collar, straightened the knot of her apron, and breathed in deeply. Her heart beat fast, but her steps were measured. Tonight, she told herself, she would do what she had always done: stay invisible. At least that had been the plan. By dusk, the ballroom was alive. Cameras flashed in bursts as guests arrived. Politicians, CEOs, actors, old money and new. They shook hands, traded smiles, spoke of charity and opportunity. On the stage, beneath the massive chandelier, Charles Whitmore basked in their glow. His tuxedo fit like armor, his laughter deep and confident. To everyone watching, he was a titan, the man who gave scholarships to underprivileged students, who rebuilt hospitals after hurricanes. To Evelyn, he was something else entirely. She watched him from across the room, pouring champagne for guests whose eyes slid past her as if she were part of the decor. Every time she saw him smile, she remembered the photograph, the smiling boy, Jamal Turner, and the charred edge of truth he had tried to burn away. Margaret Whitmore was already 3 glasses of champagne in when she began her usual performance. She floated between tables, complimenting gowns, whispering about donors, laughing too loudly. Evelyn crossed behind her with a tray, trying not to draw attention. Then came the moment. Margaret's voice, sharp and shrill, sliced through the chatter. "Evelyn!" she snapped. The room quieted just enough to hear. Evelyn turned, tray balanced, posture perfect. "Yes, ma'am." "What is this?" Margaret gestured toward the soup placed before her guest. "Taste it. Do you think this is fit for human beings?" Evelyn blinked. "Ma'am, the chef." "The chef?" Margaret interrupted, sneering. "You people always blame someone else. You've been here long enough to know better." Laughter rippled through the table, uneasy, nervous, but real. Evelyn's face flushed. She lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Margaret leaned closer, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Sorry doesn't fix stupidity." Across the room, Charles turned. He was mid-conversation with a senator, but the sound of his wife's voice, his name spoken with ridicule nearby, snapped his composure. His eyes locked onto Evelyn, and a dark fury flared behind them. The music softened. Conversations drifted to silence. People began watching, uncertain but fascinated, like spectators sensing blood before a fight. "Enough," Charles said, his voice booming. Evelyn froze. His footsteps cut across the ballroom, heavy and deliberate. The crowd shifted to make space. "Mr. Whitmore," one man began, but Charles raised a hand, silencing him. He stopped in front of Evelyn. His face, perfect under the chandelier's light, was carved in rage. "You embarrassed my wife in my house, in front of my guests." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Sir, I didn't—" Before she could finish, his hand shot out. Fingers twisted into her hair, yanking her backward. The tray flew from her hands, crashing into the floor. Crystal shattered, the sound slicing through the stunned quiet. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Evelyn cried out, stumbling, "Please!" "Do you know who I am?" Charles roared, dragging her forward. "You think you can humiliate me?" Margaret's hand covered her mouth. For a moment she looked frightened, but only for what people might think, not for Evelyn. Phones rose, guests filmed, frozen by disbelief and cowardice. A few whispered, "Is he serious?" "Charles, stop!" Margaret hissed, but her voice trembled. "Not here." "Stay out of it," he barked. He yanked Evelyn again. Her knees hit marble, pain flashed through her scalp. Still, her eyes, dark, wide, unbroken, found his. "Sir," she whispered, voice shaking, "please let me go." He leaned closer, his breath hot with anger. "You don't tell me what to do. You work for me. You exist because of me." The words hit harder than his hand. The ballroom was still. The chandeliers glittered above them like a cruel audience. "Dad!" A voice broke the spell. Ryan Whitmore, the teenage son, stepped forward, his face pale. "Dad, stop! Everyone's watching." Charles turned on him, eyes blazing. "Go back, Ryan!" "No! You're hurting her!" But pride and rage had already devoured reason. Charles straightened, still gripping Evelyn by the hair, and faced the crowd as if daring anyone to interfere. "You see this?" he shouted, voice echoing off marble and glass. "This is what happens when people forget their place." Evelyn's breathing came in sharp bursts. Her scalp burned, her vision blurred, but her mind was clear. The fear that had defined her for years felt suddenly small compared to the truth she carried. She could hear the whispers. "He's lost it. This is on video. He's done." And still, Charles held her, his fury feeding on the silence. Evelyn's lips parted. She felt the word building inside her, rising from somewhere deep, heavy as the truth itself. He leaned close again, voice low and venomous. "You will never speak again in my presence." Her heartbeat filled her ears. Then, steady and defiant, she whispered, "You don't own the truth, Mr. Whitmore." He froze, confusion flickering through his rage. "What did you say?" The cameras zoomed in. Dozens of eyes locked on her. Evelyn's chest rose. Her voice trembled, but she did not hesitate. "One word," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "Just one." And as the crowd held its breath, she prepared to say it. The word that would end his empire. The room seemed to lean toward them, a living thing made of crystal and silk, and held breath. Charles Whitmore's fist was still twisted in Evelyn's hair, his knuckles white, his jaw set. The chandeliers glittered overhead as if nothing in the world had gone wrong, as if they were not watching a man dare the universe to blink first. Evelyn felt the pull at her scalp like fire, but the pain had receded to the edges of her mind. At the center, there was only a clean, terrifying stillness, a line she had crossed and could not uncross. She met his stare. Around them, phones hovered like a ring of glassy insects, all wings and attention. Somewhere, a violinist coughed, the sound absurd in the silence. One word, she said again, and her own voice steadied her. Just one. Charles's lip curled. Say it, he hissed. Say whatever you think will save you. She took a breath that tasted of roses and fear. Then she shouted, and the shout cracked the ballroom open. Murder! The word hit the marble and multiplied. Heads snapped, hands jerked. Someone dropped a fork that clattered like a shot. The orchestra, which had been poised between two measures, sagged as bows slipped from strings. Margaret's champagne flute tilted. A pale crescent of liquid ran over her knuckle and down the stem. 100 eyes bounced from Evelyn to Charles and back again. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the sound came, a low, collective intake of breath, followed by a hiss of whispers racing table to table like brush fire. Evelyn felt his grip falter. Just enough. She stood taller, freeing her hair with a cautious twist, and stepped back. Strands still clung to his cufflink. He looked at them, then at her, as if he didn't understand how the geometry of the room had changed without his permission. She didn't wait for him. Her voice rose, not shrill, but sure. You killed that boy, she said, the words landing with the dull weight of facts. On Canyon Vista. You paid to hide it. You burned what you could and locked the rest in your desk. Lies, Charles barked, but the bark was hoarse, the old theater missing from it. He flicked his gaze to the nearest phones, then to the far doors, measuring exits the way a boxer measures distance. She's a maid. She want money. I want the truth, Evelyn said, louder now. His name was Jamal Turner, 20 years old, a sprinter. His mother's name is Angela. You left him in the road. The name did what arguments could not. It made the room imagine a person. Jamal. Faces softened, then hardened. Someone in the back whispered, I remember that headline. Another near the dais. God. Margaret found her voice. Charles, she said, and the single word was a hand reaching for a ledge. Tell them she's lying. The diamonds at her throat trembled where her pulse lived. He inhaled like a man about to deliver a closing argument. This is beneath all of you, he announced, sweeping an arm at the crowd. You know me. You've seen what I've built. I don't run from anything. This is defamation from an employee we've been more than generous to. Dad. Ryan's voice cut the speech in two. The boy stood a few steps off, his tie crooked, his face raw with something Evelyn recognized, the moment when the floor under a story gives way. His hands were open at his sides as if he'd dropped whatever he was holding without noticing. Dad, is it true? The question landed between them and made a sound only Charles seemed to hear. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, then locked his expression down. Go home, Ryan, he said softly, dangerously. This is not. Is it true? The boy insisted, louder. Silence bit the edges of the room. The phones found Charles's face and settled there. Evelyn reached into the inner pocket of her apron, and her fingers brushed the dry edge of newsprint like a match's rough head. She drew out the folded clipping with care that looked like reverence. I didn't come here to make a scene, she said, voice steady. I came to serve and go home like I do every night. But I found this in your study, in a drawer that didn't close right. She unfolded the paper, the yellowed crease cracking softly. You tried to burn it. Put that away, Charles snapped. That's stolen. Security. No one moved. The security men in dark suits held to their posts, eyes on the guests, on the phones, on the calculus of risk and paycheck. No one wanted to be the first body between a billionaire and a crowd with cameras. Evelyn read, not for drama, but for record. Hit and run kills local college athlete, driver flees, Canyon Vista Road, Westbridge College sprinter, police asking witnesses to come forward. She lifted her eyes. You never did. "What are you doing?" Margaret whispered, not to Evelyn, but to her husband. She had reached the chair behind her without realizing it, and gripped its back as if it were a railing on a ship taking a hard wave. The last of the stagecraft drained from Charles's face. He looked at the clipping as if it were something alive and venomous. He shot 2 steps forward, hand outstretched. "Give me that." 2 men, donors, friends, it didn't matter, stepped between them, palms open toward him with the polite, immovable refusal of people who have finally decided to be on record. The shift was microscopic and complete. He was no longer the center. He was the subject. "You don't know what you're holding," he said, and something like a plea slid under the threat. "I know enough," Evelyn answered. "I know you paid $2 million to make sure this never saw a courtroom." A murmur rolled through the crowd at the number, not at the sum, but at its confession. "I know a car in your garage has been under a cover for months. I know your legal team called this closure, while his mother learned how to breathe around a hole. You don't understand," he managed, and for the first time the words sounded true, but not in the way he meant. His eyes were glassy now, his mouth dry. The room's oxygen, the reverence, the fear, the benefit of the doubt, was thinning, and he knew it. "Then explain it," Ryan said, not a challenge. A request, small and breaking. "Explain it to me." The boy's face undid something no accusation could. Charles opened his mouth and found nothing ready. He looked down, then up, as if answers might be written on the polished floor or in the chandelier's cut glass. He put a hand on the nearest table to steady himself. The linen wrinkled under his fingers. "It was dark," he said finally, the words dropping like coins. "There was rain. He stepped out. It happened fast." He swallowed. Someone called. I didn't." The sentence collapsed under its own weight. "You didn't stop," Evelyn said. "That's what you didn't." A woman in silver near the front pressed a napkin to her mouth. A man at the senator's elbow shook his head once, slowly, like a verdict he hadn't wanted to deliver. "I built this city's wings," Charles said suddenly, voice flaring in a last attempt at altitude. "Hospitals, scholarships, thousands of jobs. You think any of that exists if small men try to take down great ones for a mistake?" His breath hitched. "I have paid for everything I ever did wrong. I overpaid." "Except the one thing you owed," Evelyn replied. "You didn't pay with the truth." The line didn't soar, it settled. In the old moral math of rooms like this, perhaps truth had been a negotiable instrument. Tonight it was hard currency. He sat down without quite deciding to, the chair catching him more rudely than a man like him was used to being caught. Sweat darkened his hair at the temples. He rubbed at his chest, but the hitching breath was not a heart failing. It was a mask loosening. "Charles," Margaret whispered again, and now she sounded like someone asking a question she already understood the answer to. "Did you hit that boy?" He didn't look at her. He looked at the tablecloth he'd wrinkled, as if smoothing it could uncrease a decade. "It was an accident," he said, too soft for the back of the room, but not for the phones aimed at his lips. "I was going to—" He stopped. The sentence did not know where to go. Evelyn took a step so the cameras could see both faces in the same frame. The woman who had served this family and the man who had fed on its worship. "I'm not your enemy," she said, almost gently. "I'm the person who saw what others chose not to see." A tremor traveled through the crowd. People weren't sure whether to clap or pray. No one did either. They filmed. For a long half-minute, nothing moved except the tiny hands of watches and the red lights of a few cameras. It would be easy to say the night hung in the balance, but it had already tipped. What the room felt now was gravity asserting itself. Charles tried one more door. "Security," he said again, but softer, like a ritual that had lost its god. "Escort Miss Carter out." The security men did the math, the donors stepping forward, the senator on record, the phones, the way the story would read if they touched her now, and remained rooted. Evelyn held the clipping at her side. She could feel the newsprint's heat from her own hand, the oils of her skin making it less a prop and more a possession. "I didn't want to do this here," she said to no one and everyone, "but you made public what should have been private. You dragged me across your floor to prove you still could. Now the floor belongs to the truth." In the far corner, a server who couldn't be older than 19 nodded once, sharp and small, as if something inside her had been named. Ryan took a tiny step toward his father. "We can fix this," he said, whispering in a voice the microphone still caught. "Tell them. Tell Mom. Tell the police. Please." Charles's eyes flicked to the doors, then to the windows, as if architecture might offer escape. The old calculations, money, favors, fear, ran through him and came up short. He pressed his palms flat to the table, then lifted them, leaving 2 dark prints of sweat that would say more to any detective than his next 10 sentences. "Dad," Ryan said again, and the AA in the word was a wound. Somewhere in the back, a guest's ringtone, silenced too late, vibrated a staccato beat and died. Then, over it, under it, rising through it, came the sound Evelyn had imagined and dreaded and hoped for all at once. Heavy footsteps, not hurried but sure, echoing off marble as if the house itself were announcing them. Conversations vanished. Heads turned toward the entry. The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted in a reflex older than etiquette. In the doorway, beneath the carved lintel with the Whitmore crest, uniformed officers appeared, 2 in navy, 1 in a charcoal suit with a badge at his belt and a notebook in his hand. They didn't rush. They walk the line between tables with the deliberate pace of people who understand what spectacle is and refuse it. The detective's eyes took in the room, the faces, the phones, the woman with the clipping, the man with damp temples and hands that could not find a resting place. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice level, carrying. "Detective Harris, LAPD." The microphones found him, too. Margaret's hand slid from the chair back to her stomach and stayed there, as if she were steadying an illness that had finally named itself. Ryan exhaled a breath he had been holding since childhood. Charles closed his eyes for a second, then opened them and stood. He tried for his old height and found some of it, but the room saw the effort. "Detective," he said, with the cordiality of a man who had cut ribbons beside sheriffs and thought it made them peers. "This is a private event." The detective did not look impressed or unimpressed. He looked like a man at work. His gaze rested on Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said, calm as a clean sheet of paper, "are you the one who called earlier?" Evelyn's throat flexed. The room had gone so quiet that the flirt of a candle's flame sounded like paper turning. She nodded once. "Yes." "Do you have what you told the officer you had?" She lifted the clipping. Her hand shook, but the paper didn't. "I do." The detective took a step closer, stopping just short of touching distance, because enough had already been done to this woman in this room. "We'll need to speak with you," he said. Then his eyes moved to Charles and settled there, not hostile, not deferent, procedural. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, and the name had none of the thunder it had enjoyed 10 minutes earlier. "I'm going to ask you to stay right where you are." A pulse of sound ran through the crowd, an inhale, an almost applause, a held scream. No one knew which it was yet. The moment did not belong to them, it belonged to what came next. Charles looked around the ballroom he had built like a church to himself. He saw his wife's tear-bright eyes, his son's open hands, the phones that would not blink. He saw the stage where he had rehearsed a victory speech, and the chair where he had sat when the air deserted him. He saw a maid, no, a woman, holding a piece of paper he had tried to erase from the world. He lifted his chin. "Detective," he said again, and the second time it sounded like a man negotiating with gravity. "I'll speak with my counsel present." "You'll have that opportunity," Harris replied, not unkindly. He nodded to an officer, then back to Evelyn. "Ma'am, please keep that with you for now. Don't hand it to anyone you don't know as law enforcement." Evelyn nodded. Her fingers curled around the clipping as if it were both fragile and invincible. A waiter in the far corner set his tray down on a sideboard and stepped back, empty hands visible. The orchestra's conductor, still on the small dais, lowered his arm slowly, as if releasing a spell. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else whispered a headline. The detective turned slightly, addressing the room without elevating his voice. "This evening's going to continue differently than planned," he said. "We're going to ask for calm. We're going to take statements. And we're going to do this the right way." Evelyn felt the architecture of the night shift, a click like a lock sliding, like the drawer that had given beneath her hand. The empire hadn't fallen yet, but it was leaning, visibly, audibly, under the weight of a word. She drew breath, slow and full, and hers. The light from the chandeliers found her face and did not look away. At the doorway, more officers appeared, guiding hotel staff to hold the perimeter to keep the cameras outside from becoming a stampede inside. The guests parted once more, obedient to an older choreography than charity galas, the one that begins when authority enters the room. The detective faced Charles again, the distance between them a table's width and 10 unspoken years. "Sir," he said, as evenly as before, "we're going to have a conversation." The ballroom did not exhale. It waited, every eye, every lens, every suspended breath trained on the space where a king had stood and a man now swayed. And, with the officer's arrival filling the doorway, the night crossed its last threshold. The ballroom no longer felt like a place of celebration. It felt like a courthouse. The chandeliers that had once shimmered with luxury now glared like spotlights exposing every lie. No one spoke. No one dared to move. The only sound came from the clicking of cameras and the faint echo of footsteps. Officers making their way toward the man who once ruled the room. Detective Harris stopped just a few feet away from Charles Whitmore. His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of weight that silences even the powerful. "Mr. Whitmore, you're under arrest for assault," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to sink in, "and you will be detained for questioning regarding the hit-and-run death of Jamal Turner." For a moment, time didn't move. Charles blinked as if he hadn't heard. "You can't be serious," he muttered, voice cracking. "This is my home. You have no right to—" The detective's tone sharpened. "We have a warrant, Mr. Whitmore. You'll have your attorney present downtown." As the first officer reached for his arm, Charles recoiled, shoving the man away. "Don't touch me," he roared. "Do you know who I am? I'll destroy you. I'll destroy all of you." But the fury sounded hollow now, like a drum that had lost its skin. The officers moved in again, swift and unflinching. One gripped his wrist, twisting it behind his back. The other secured the second arm. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom like a closing door. Gasps filled the silence. Phones rose higher. Every guest wanted proof of the fall. The philanthropist, the man on magazine covers, now stood bent and cuffed, sweat soaking his collar. Margaret collapsed into a chair, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled ink. Her diamond bracelet clattered against the floor as she covered her face. "Charles," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you?" He didn't look at her. His head hung low, eyes fixed on the marble beneath his feet. Ryan stood near the doorway, his face ghost pale. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just watched as officers pulled his father toward the exit. When Charles passed him, their eyes met for half a heartbeat. The boy's look wasn't of hate, it was disappointment deep enough to wound. Outside the ballroom, red and blue lights flickered through the massive windows. News vans had already begun to swarm the estate. The first videos from inside had hit social media within minutes, flooding feeds across the country. Billionaire exposed at charity gala. Detective Harris nodded at Evelyn. "Miss Carter will need a full statement, but you did the right thing tonight." Evelyn's hands trembled. She nodded slowly. "It wasn't just for me," she said. "It was for the truth, and for him." She glanced down at the clipping still clutched in her palm, Jamal's young face staring back from another lifetime. As Charles was led down the grand staircase, reporters shouted questions through the open doors. "Mr. Whitmore, did you kill Jamal Turner? Is it true you paid off the family? Do you have anything to say to the victim's mother?" He didn't answer. The flash of cameras painted him in bursts of white light as he was pushed toward the waiting patrol car. The man who once controlled everything now moved like a prisoner caught in the gravity of his own sins. Margaret stumbled after him, barefoot now, calling his name. "Charles, please!" Her voice cracked, thin and desperate, but the car door slammed before she reached it. Ryan stayed on the steps, frozen. The night wind stirred his hair, but he didn't move. He watched the police car pull away until its lights disappeared beyond the gate. Only then did he whisper, so quietly that no one but Evelyn heard. "He used to tell me the truth was the only thing that mattered." Evelyn turned toward him. "Then tonight he finally learned it," she said softly. Inside, the ballroom remained a wreck. Crystal shards glittering on the floor, half-finished glasses of champagne, whispers still circling the air like ghosts that refused to leave. The guests filed out quietly, their gowns brushing against the marble, their conversations hushed and careful. No one mentioned donations or business. They all knew the story would be everywhere by morning. Evelyn stayed behind as the last people left. The chandeliers dimmed, leaving the room in soft shadow. She walked to the center of the floor, the place where he had dragged her, where she had spoken one word that tore through his empire like lightning. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool marble under her sore knees, the sting in her scalp fading into nothing. She thought of Marcus and Lily, of all the nights she had stayed silent to keep them safe. She thought of Angela Turner, the mother who had buried her son without answers. Now, finally, someone had spoken for them both. A tear rolled down Evelyn's cheek, not of sorrow, but of release. She looked up toward the massive chandelier and whispered, "It's over." Detective Harris reappeared at the door. "Miss Carter, are you ready?" She nodded, slipping the folded clipping carefully into her pocket. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Let's finish this." As they walked through the grand foyer, the night air hit her face. Cool, clean, unburdened. The flashing lights painted the driveway in blue and red, reflecting off the fountains and the columns that once symbolized power. Now they looked like the ruins of something false. She watched the patrol car vanish down the hill, its siren a distant wail fading into the dark. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel small, She felt free. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, news cameras, interviews, maybe court, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth had finally spoken. She whispered into the night, her words carried away by the wind. The truth always wins, even when it's alone. The camera flashes caught the moment, her silhouette standing tall before the mansion, a quiet figure against the chaos. That image, not the billionaire's downfall, would be the one the world remembered. One word ended his empire, but began her freedom. The truth can be silenced for years, but it never dies. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to Gateway Stories. And tell us in the comments, do you believe truth always wins?